welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the I Didn't Read Your Book podcast. I am your host, Lutch, and today we are doing something a little bit different. I wasn't exactly sure whether to make this a podcast episode or to do this as like an IDRYB live or something else. But I feel like it really does fit, and if you are a fan of previous IDRYB episodes, I definitely think you will enjoy this one. Today, I'm going to be talking to Dan Smith about his podcast, Coffee in Space. And the reason that I'm going to be talking about another podcast is because this is another podcast where Dan, the host, speaks to authors. And so what we're going to do is kind of just compare notes and compare experiences and see what what it's been like for us and what it's been like for him, what are the differences, all that kind of stuff. And just like another author that we might have, I think this will be a really cool peek into people creating stuff, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a stand-up comedy special or anything else. Content is content. And it's not all equal, but it is all great. So before we get into speaking with Dan, I don't have a synopsis to read, but we can take a peek at the website. So this is the Coffee in Space podcast. So we've got our logo here. So again, with the typical format, I would have no idea what this is about, but because of the way that Dan and I found each other, I do kind of know what it's about. But let's read anyway. That's a really good question. Welcome to the Coffee in Space podcast. I'm so glad you've stopped by. I hope you'll give an episode or 3 a listen. Find your favorite author and maybe learn about an author you haven't met yet. You're going to love meeting these writers. I hope you find your next great read on this podcast. So that sounds very, very much like exactly what I do. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of what kind of things that we have in common and what kind of things we don't. And since again we don't have a back of the book to read, let's dive right in and read about the show. Coffee in Space podcast is a show designed to get the best in established and up-and-coming speculative fiction writers in front of you, their readers. I want to help you learn more about who they are as people, how they write, and how they live, and maybe find a new author you'd like to read. Who knows? It has also become a mission of mine to highlight issues pertaining to our culture. I'll take a few moments after each interview to talk about something relevant to our time, as well as offer some tidbits of news that I think you'll find interesting. So again, very, very similar to in terms of goals, what we're doing, what he and I are doing. It's going to be interesting to see what those cultural messages are. I would assume that because the nature of both of our shows is being ourselves as a surrogate for you guys, his perspective is going to, well, it definitely is going to be very different than mine, but the ways in which we're different are going to be the crux of the difference in our shows. The shows hinge on the personality and the perspective of the host, respectively, because we're talking about somebody else's work. So I would assume that he reads the books. That, I mean, I've got my excuse in the name, but I would imagine that if you talk to authors about their books, that you would read their book, unless you're specifically trying to not. But it doesn't say, because it doesn't say anything, I'm going to assume that. So I am looking at my brand new curved monitor, courtesy of donations to the channel. Thank you very, very much. Those support links are in the description below. I would greatly appreciate if you could help me continue to build this, to build a better product for you. But what I'm looking at, I want just something to go off of. I like to go into these conversations as raw as possible, but I don't want to just be like, so, hey, who are you? What do you do? What do you know? I want to have a little bit something. So we have here commentary. So what makes a person human? One of the things that impresses me so much about C. Robert Cargill's writing is that he explores what it means to be a human. Is it an original thought? Is it a soul? Is it the ability to use tools? Even inside the human species, what makes someone my equal? Is it someone at the same intelligence level? Someone of the same racial makeup? Economic condition? In American history, slaves were counted for 3 people for every 5 existing individuals for taxation and representation purposes. It's in our frickin' Constitution, or was. It was finally undone by the 13th Amendment in the Constitution in 1865. It was, back then as it is now, a political problem. If only freed people were counted, the northern states would have overwhelmed the southern states in Congress. If all persons in the South were counted, then the southern states would have overwhelmed the North, despite having fewer states represented. The compromise counted human beings based on race. That compromise, like the rest of slavery history, is a sick black mark on American and Western history. I submit that we are still paying for the Civil War even now. One of the things that happens in war is that we dehumanize the enemy. They become slurs and targets, not people, not human. This has always happened in all wars, by all sides. In some ways, perhaps it is human nature to devalue the opposition in a conflict so as to justify one's actions against that culture and people group. It's probably really hard to fight a war against someone you see as an equal. This isn't just a racism problem. I remember reading about Fun in the Sun, how Allied pilots would describe German fighter pilots in World War I. In World War II, they were called Jerry. I won't repeat that Japanese military men and civilian women were called what they were called in the same war, nor will I use the term of the Vietnamese fighter. I guess as a white person, well, so I guess he's white. I feel I can use terms against other whites, whether, all right. It's no more right that African-American person use the N-word, but blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I mean, if you're being historical and, I think there's a big difference between calling people names, calling someone a Jap, and saying that in World War II, they called them the Japs. That's those are 2 very different things. And, it's kind of sad that somebody who is exploring these things with such pure intentions feels the need to not only censor themselves, but take on the guilt of people who have used those words in a negative connotation and not able to feel comfortable saying that, no, I'm a good person. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not trying to do anything wrong. And maybe some of you would say that I'm wrong in that he is right, that whether he is having negative intentions or not, that the words have power. I don't subscribe to that. And so maybe that'll be that certainly shows a difference in perspective. But again, I'm also not white, so I might feel differently if I was white. So this goes further, of course, to society at large. Look at social media memes devaluing the opposition next time you're on Facebook or Twitter. It's probably a picture of a wild-eyed individual who's completely out of control. I'm picturing one of the conservatives' use against liberals even as I say this. Not that there aren't others used by the liberal side, both sides, for there seems to be only 2 sides one can pick between these days, do the same. I mean, fair enough. He brought it back and said that, it happens on both sides. It's interesting how I don't consider myself a conservative. I am more libertarian than anything else. And when I'm reading that, I am thinking of, the far leftist ideology. So it's interesting that that's where his mind goes first, and that's where my mind goes first. But again, we both say that both sides do it, so no harm, no foul. Just pointing out a difference there. Diving back in, I just love how the main character has to decide how their humanity works. It's a very honest take, as is Cargill's take on what makes his robots human-like. I submit that were we to really believe the other person is a human, a fully valued human, we'd be slower to attack, degrade, and destroy. We'd realize that maybe those monuments need to come down because they celebrate a person tasked with defending the rights of slave owners. Maybe we'd realize the vast majority of cops don't hide behind their badges and that they're good citizens trying to protect other good citizens. Sadly, it's easier in most cases to assume the offensive. I hope we can end this instinctive response. As always, I'm grateful for you, my listeners, and I look forward to our next chat over a cup of coffee in space. So that was, I think, just in those last couple paragraphs, that really gave an interesting look into Dan's politics. He doesn't seem like he's too deep in the weeds of tribalism, but clearly he leans one way, and I hesitate to say I lean the other way. I would rather say I lean a different way. But that'll be really interesting to see how that affects our podcast and our experiences. Now, what I don't want to do is just turn this into a political debate. We can do that separately. What I want to do today is compare notes about our podcasts. So I'm specifically going to steer away from politics in terms of debating issues, because I can do that with anyone. And I can do that with Dan at a later date if he is interested. But what I can't do is talk with another person who does a very, very similar podcast to mine and compare experiences. I don't know how long he's been doing it, but it's likely longer than the few months that I have. So don't go in expecting the type of debate that you might see on an IDRYB live. I am specifically looking to take that and separate it as much as possible from the podcast itself. Now, oftentimes these conversations are super, super relevant to the book and to the author, but I don't want this to just be, I bring somebody on so that I can talk about what I want to talk, even though what I do want to talk about is the podcast. I would love to talk about the political implications of this and that, and but that is not what we're here for. So if all goes well, I'm sure, we could just like with Blaine Pardoe, just like with Andrew Regard, we have done hours of political content, but you're not gonna find too much of that here. I hope. I'm going to try to keep it more about the podcasts and the work we do and our experiences. If it seems like he is somebody who would be good for a political conversation, we'll definitely do it. I'm definitely into it. But I just don't want you to go in, whether, if you're on the left or on the right, just, oh yeah, Lutch is going to hand it to him, or oh yeah, Lutch is going to get his ass handed to him. That's not what we're doing. So with that being said, let's bring in S. Daniel Smith.